No one could explain it. Not the security guards, not the nurses, not even Officer Mallory herself. But every single night, like clockwork, Jet, the 5-year-old K9 German Shepherd, would drag her down the hallway of the psychiatric wing at St. Vincent's Hospital, stop at a specific door and scratch. Not bark, not sniff, scratch. Slowly, deliberately. Claws against steel like he was trying to dig up something buried. And the thing was, room 207 had been sealed shut for over 15 years. No one used it. No one talked about it. It didn't even appear on the new hospital maps. But Jet didn't care. His behavior had started 2 weeks ago when Mallory took temporary assignment for nighttime patrol during the renovation of the West Wing. She thought it was a fluke at first, maybe a rat in the wall or the smell of mold behind the door. But it wasn't that. Not even close. St. Vincent's Hospital in Cedar Falls, Ohio, was the kind of place you drove by and never really thought about. A sprawling old building with a newer wing glued awkwardly to one side, it had been a fixture of the town for over 60 years. The East Wing had been converted into a state-of-the-art trauma unit. But the West Wing, the psych building, was a different story. Outdated, half-renovated, and oddly quiet, it still held patients, mostly those with long-term care needs or awaiting transfers. Mallory had been posted there after a string of equipment thefts had set off internal alarms. It wasn't glamorous duty, but it paid the bills. Besides, she liked working with Jet more than people most days. But Jet had changed ever since they'd walked past room 207. The first night, it had just been a pause. Jet stopped walking, turned to the door, and stared. Ears high, eyes locked. The second night, he scratched. Quiet at first, almost like a nervous tick. By the fourth night, he was growling. Not aggressively, but deeply. Like something was wrong and only he could sense it. Mallory knelt beside him and ran her hand down his back. "What is it, boy?" He didn't look at her. He just kept staring at that door. She mentioned it to the night supervisor, Nurse Beatrice, the next day over coffee. "Oh, that old thing," the older woman scoffed. "Yeah, they locked 207 down back in, 2009, I think. Say it had black mold or asbestos or something. Honestly, the whole wing needs to be gutted." "You ever see anyone use it?" Mallory asked. "Not in my shift. Hell, they even took the number plaque off the door." That part was true. There was just a metal rectangle on the wall where a number used to be the paint slightly lighter underneath. That night around 1:15 a.m., Mallory's radio crackled. "Noise alert. West Wing Corridor B motion sensor flagged." She checked the cameras from the hallway tablet. Nothing. No movement, no open doors, except for one strange flicker near room 207. A brief grainy glitch like static right in front of the door. Jet's ears perked up before she even moved. They walked the hall in silence. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The kind of hum that gets under your skin. As they approached the door, Jet's steps slowed. His nose twitched. Then came the scratching, this time frantic, sharp, urgent. Hey, easy," Mallory whispered, grabbing his harness. "We're gonna get written up." Jet pulled harder. Mallory turned her flashlight on the door. The paint had scratches, long uneven gouges deep enough to peel metal. But not from Jet. They were too old. Rust had formed around the edges. Someone had scratched at this door a long time ago. She took 3 steps back. And for the first time in a long time, she felt afraid. Not from a suspect, not from a threat, but from something she didn't understand. And Jet? He wasn't afraid. He was waiting, like he knew someone was still inside. If you're drawn in by stories of real animal heroes uncovering hidden truths, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Heroes for Animals, where stories like Jet's show you the power of instinct, loyalty, and justice. The next morning, Mallory filed a quiet request with her precinct's archives. She wanted any past records of room 207 at St. Vincent's. The reply was short. No known patient records. Maintenance filed one report in April 2009, sealed due to contamination risk. No follow-up available. That was it. But Mallory didn't stop there. She took a detour after her shift and visited the local historical society, which kept records of hospital floor plans and personnel changes. When she asked for blueprints from before 2010, the archivist raised an eyebrow. Most folks come in here looking for Civil War obits or marriage licenses, not old psych ward maps. Mallory smiled. Guess I'm not most folks. The floor plan of the West Wing showed room 207 clearly, and something else. It used to connect to a back hallway, one that had been sealed off along with 3 other rooms. Why close off an entire section? And why pretend room 207 didn't exist? The deeper Mallory looked, the more questions she had. And the more Jet growled. That night the hallway was colder than usual. Her breath fogged up slightly in front of her. The heating system must have been acting up, but Jet didn't seem to care. He stood in front of the door, tail stiff, ears up. Then he did something new. He barked. Once. Loud. Piercing. Mallory nearly jumped. Then the hallway lights above her flickered. Just for a second. Enough to make her drop her flashlight. When she bent to pick it up, she noticed something under the frame of the door. A thin, curled piece of paper, half yellowed. She reached for it slowly and tugged. It tore a little, but enough came through to read. Don't trust the ones who smile too much. He watches through the glass. I tried to tell them, but no one listens. No one ever listens. No name, no signature, just those words. Jet leaned into her shoulder, pressing hard. Mallory stared at the door. There was no mold, no asbestos smell, no medical hazard warning. But there was something in that room, something Jet wasn't going to let her ignore. The next morning, Mallory made a decision. She submitted a formal request to have room 207 inspected by the hospital's facilities team. It was denied in under 10 minutes. The reason: room does not exist in current inventory. No maintenance authorized. Later that day, Mallory passed by the janitor's supply closet and saw someone she hadn't met before. Old man, thin sunken cheeks, gray jumpsuit. He nodded at her and said, "You're the one with the dog, huh?" She froze. Yeah. He pointed his mop toward the west hall. "You should be careful where he scratches." Mallory raised an eyebrow. "Why?" The man just smiled and said, "Because some doors were meant to stay shut, and some things on the other side ain't ever left." Then he walked away. And Jet? He was already waiting by room 207, scratching again. The night after the janitor's warning, Mallory couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that door room 207 peeling silent waiting. And Jet, her loyal partner, just sitting there in the hallway like a soldier guarding something sacred, or something cursed. She wasn't one to believe in ghost stories. She'd worked homicide in Cleveland for 6 years before taking this softer, rural assignment. She'd seen things people don't walk away from, but Jet had never acted like this before. Never locked onto a place the way he had with that door. It wasn't just a scent anymore. It was instinct, memory, maybe fear. And maybe it was a warning. The next morning, Mallory walked into the Cedar Falls City Records office with a purpose. "I'm looking for historical zoning maps and blueprints for St. Vincent's Hospital," she told the clerk. "East Wing or West?" the woman asked, typing with one hand and sipping black coffee with the other. "West. Anything before 2010. The woman raised an eyebrow. "Most people don't care about the psych wing. You a reporter? Just curious." 10 minutes later, Mallory was flipping through a thick binder full of floor plans, permits, and inspections. One particular plan from 2006 made her sit up straight. Room 207 wasn't just part of a standard hallway. It was the center of a small loop that included 3 other rooms, 205, 206, and 208. A service corridor connected them from the back, running behind the patient observation units. And room 207 had something the others didn't. A large reinforced mirror mounted between its wall and the adjacent corridor. A mirror, facing out, not in. She took a photo of the blueprint on her phone and stared at it on the drive back to the hospital. The more she looked, the more wrong it felt. Why reinforce a mirror from the inside? Why place a 2-way mirror in a psych ward? And why was the entire section suddenly closed off right after 2009? Back on shift that night, Mallory and Jet made their usual rounds. But this time she took a detour. The main door to room 207 was still sealed, still cold to the touch. But she followed the hallway on the map to where the back corridor should have been, now a wall covered in drywall and beige paint like every other part of the wing. She knocked on the wall. "Hollow, Jet," she said, stepping back. He stood next to her, unmoving, then sniffed the baseboard. Then he growled. Low and slow. Mallory's heart thumped. She grabbed her flashlight and looked for any panel vent or access hatch. There, just above the floor, a metal latch, painted over, but still there. Mallory returned after her shift ended at 3 a.m. with a flathead screwdriver, a flashlight, and a decision she knew would get her suspended if anyone found out. She pried the latch open. It groaned like it hadn't been touched in years. Inside was a crawlspace. Jet ducked in without hesitation. "Guess we're going in," she whispered, heart racing. The space was tight. Dust stung her nose. It smelled like mold copper and something worse, something stale like old linens and forgotten time. Jet led the way. After about 15 feet, they emerged into the back service corridor. Abandoned. Half the overhead bulbs were dead. Cobwebs hung like drapes. On the floor were scuff marks as if someone had been dragged. Mallory stepped around a collapsed gurney and looked up at a faded sign on the wall. Observation Hall. B patient access restricted. And then Jet stopped. Dead center of the corridor in front of a door with a scratched-up nameplate. Room 207, OBS access. The door was open. Just a crack. Mallory's fingers hovered above her holster. She pushed the door slowly. It creaked louder than any door had a right to. The room inside was dark, darker than it should have been. Dust floated in the beam of her flashlight. The floor was tiled, stained, uneven. And at the far end of the room, the mirror. Huge, almost the size of a small theater screen. It was cracked at the corner and covered in a fine layer of dust. Jet didn't move. Mallory stepped forward. Under the mirror, just below the center, someone had etched something into the wall. She leaned in with the flashlight. It was hard to make out, but after a few swipes with her sleeve, the words became visible. She told the truth. They shut her up. Her mouth went dry. Jet sat beside her, silent, watching the mirror. Then just for a second, she thought she saw it. A flicker. Not in the room. In the reflection, a shadow. Gone just as fast. She turned around, empty. Jet began to whimper. Later that morning, Mallory sat in her car outside the hospital and replayed everything she'd seen in her mind. Room 207 was never closed for asbestos. It had been used for something else. Something they didn't want public. The reinforced mirror, the hidden corridor, the silence in the records, all of it pointed to something bigger. But what? A week ago, she would have said this was crazy. Now, she didn't know what to believe. She called a retired friend, Frank, a former detective who now worked part-time at the local college. "Ever hear of off-record patient studies at St. Vincent's?" she asked. There was a pause. "You mean like MK Ultra stuff? That place gives me the creeps." "I'm serious. I found a room with a two-way mirror in the psych wing." "That's not protocol for psych observation," he said, his tone shifting. "That's for interrogation. Or worse." "Worse?" "Yeah, behavior testing. Watch them break. Record how they react, then bury it." Mallory's stomach turned. She dug deeper into the hospital's internal reports. Most were clean. But one record from April 2009 stood out. Filed under Incident Unresolved Patient Exit. The patient's name had been blacked out, but the summary said, "Individual exited care unit through unauthorized corridor. Last seen in hallway 207B. Search unsuccessful. Presumed runaway. No foul play determined." But that was it. No follow-up, no case closure, no evidence of family contact. A human being disappeared, and no one cared. That night, Jet refused to walk any other hallway. He pulled Mallory straight to the mirror door again. When she tried to coax him away, he growled, not at her, but at the mirror itself. She looked at her own reflection. Behind her, nothing, but her skin prickled. Jet barked, loud, sudden, and then the hospital lights flickered again. The next day, Mallory went to a retired nurse who used to work in the West Wing. Her name was Margaret Trenton. Lived alone now. Quiet life. When Mallory mentioned room 207, Margaret's entire face changed. "That room should have been burned," she said flatly. "What happened in there? I don't know the whole thing. But there was a girl, a teenager. Sweet voice. Said she saw things through the glass. Said she tried to tell someone." "What was her name?" Margaret swallowed hard. "Kayla," she whispered. "Kayla Monroe." "Did she die?" Margaret looked Mallory in the eye and said something she would never forget. "Honey, she disappeared. There's a difference between being curious and digging too deep." Mallory knew that. She wasn't some hotshot rookie looking to break a conspiracy. She just wanted the truth. For Jet, for herself, and now for a name. Kayla Monroe, a teenager who disappeared from St. Vincent's in 2009. No official records, no missing persons file on public record, no obituaries. Just whispers, a few half-remembered faces, and one scratched-up door sealed behind drywall. And that room, the one Jet wouldn't stop scratching at. It was starting to feel less like a place and more like a wound, something someone didn't want reopened. Mallory sat in her squad car outside the hospital the next night, flipping through a stack of photocopies she'd pulled from the local newspaper archives. There was only one mention of Kayla Monroe in the entire county press. A 17-year-old at-risk girl transferred from a juvenile facility to St. Vincent's Psychiatric for evaluation and temporary inpatient care. Date of transfer: April 3, 2009, the same week the hospital sealed room 207. And just like that, no follow-up, no discharge notice, no photograph. It was like the girl had never existed. Inside the hospital, everything looked normal. Bright lights, cold floors, bleached sheets, nurses in navy scrubs talking about baseball scores and daycare pickups. But Jet didn't care about normal. He pulled Mallory straight toward the sealed corridor again. Room 207 was still locked, still silent. But someone had been there. The fresh scuff marks on the floor told her that much. Someone else knew. "Hey, you're the one with the dog, right?" Mallory turned. A younger nurse, maybe mid-20s, stood behind her holding a clipboard and a half-empty coffee cup. Her ID badge read, Emily T. "Yeah, that's me. Officer Mallory. This is Jet." Emily smiled and reached down to pet him, but Jet stepped back. "Sorry," Mallory said. "He's been intense lately. I heard. Some of the night staff are talking about him scratching up the old psych hall. Kind of freaky, huh?" Mallory hesitated. "You ever hear of a patient named Kayla Monroe?" The nurse's smile faded just a little. "No," she said too quickly. "Why, I think she disappeared here in 2009. Emily's fingers tightened around her cup. "That was before my time." "Still," Mallory said, lowering her voice, "if you hear anything at all, I'd appreciate it." The nurse looked over her shoulder, then whispered, "There's a guy in maintenance, Martin Gale. He's been here forever. Kind of creepy, but he knows stuff. He never talks to anyone, but he used to cover the psych wing back then." Mallory nodded. "Thanks." And just like that, Emily was gone. Mallory found Martin Gale that same night, wheeling a mop bucket down the first-floor hallway, like a man who hadn't aged since the Nixon administration. "Mr. Gale," she asked. He didn't stop walking. "Just need to ask about the West Wing, room 207. He paused, slowly turned. His eyes were watery and yellowed, his expression unreadable. "I don't go back there anymore," he said flatly. "Why not?" "You already know why," he said, voice low. "The dog does anyway." Mallory stepped closer. "Did you know Kayla Monroe?" Martin looked down at the mop water, then back at her. She was too smart for her own good. Saw things she wasn't supposed to. "Like what?" He shook his head. "Not here. Not with cameras." Then he pushed his mop and walked away. But before he rounded the corner, he looked back over his shoulder and said, "Check the boiler room, behind the second access panel. Some things didn't get erased as well as they thought." The boiler room was hot, loud, and humid, tucked below the main level of the hospital like a secret nobody wanted to remember. Mallory waited until 3:15 a.m. when most of the staff were on rotation or asleep in the lounge. Jet led the way. The second panel, just like Martin said, was behind a dusty old metal cabinet bolted to the wall. Mallory unscrewed it using her multi-tool hands slick with sweat. Behind the panel was a small metal lockbox. No label, no hospital ID. She pried it open with a crowbar from the supply closet. Inside, a single cassette tape labeled with one word, Kayla. It took Mallory an hour to find someone at the local library who still had a working cassette player. The teen librarian, maybe 17 years old himself, looked thrilled just to have something weird happen during his shift. She took the player back to her apartment and sat on the couch with Jet at her feet, tail still and eyes alert. She pressed play. Sound of faint static, then a voice, a girl's voice. They think I don't know, but I see it. I see it through the glass. They say I'm sick, but I'm not. I know what they're doing. They watch us, even when we sleep. The mirror in 207, it's not a mirror, it's a camera. There's a man in the next room who talks to it, but only when he thinks we're asleep. A long pause. Then, his name is Dr. Holland, I heard the nurses whisper. He's not even listed on the staff sheet anymore, and he hates when I ask questions. Another pause, softer now. If I don't show up one day, tell someone. Please. Someone has to know what they did to me. The tape ended in a sharp click. Jet let out a low, wounded whine. Mallory stared at the recorder like it might explode. Dr. Holland. She pulled up the staff database on her laptop and typed in the name. No matches. She tried Google. Nothing. Then finally, she pulled the archived staff logs from 2009, stored in a separate database tied to a former lawsuit. There he was. Dr. Garrett Holland, behavioral psychologist, listed as resigned April 17, 2009. The same week, Kayla vanished. Mallory drove back to the hospital just before dawn, parked in the back lot, and walked the halls with Jet beside her. Room 207 was still closed, still silent. But as she passed it this time, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A light faint and pulsing coming from behind the mirror. She froze. Jet barked once, loud, demanding. She stepped closer. The light blinked out. But in that moment, she saw it reflected in the glass. A silhouette. Someone was standing in the other room, watching her. She backed away slowly, heart pounding. She pulled her radio to call it in, but stopped. Because something deep in her gut told her not to. Someone was listening. Not just from the other side of the glass, but from inside the hospital. And not everyone wanted the truth out. Later that morning, she got a call on her personal cell. No caller ID. She let it go to voicemail. But the message chilled her to the bone. A male voice, low and calm. "You're in over your head, officer. Stop asking about 207. Let the dog bark all it wants. But you still have a choice," Jet growled when the message played. And Mallory. She sat in silence, fists clenched. Because now it wasn't just about curiosity. It was about Kayla. About Jet. About truth. And she wasn't backing down. Mallory had broken a lot of rules in her career. But that night, as she stood in front of room 207 with a crowbar in one hand and her K9 partner Jet at her side, she knew she was about to burn the last few bridges she had left. She didn't care anymore. Not after the voicemail, not after the tape, and definitely not after the silhouette behind the mirror. This wasn't just about an old case. This was about a teenage girl who vanished, about a room no one wanted to admit existed, and about a German shepherd who couldn't stop scratching at something the rest of the world refused to see. She slid a set of maintenance lockpicks into the door latch. Jet sat silently behind her eyes, fixed on the dark crack between the door and frame. The hallway was quiet, too quiet. Even the hum of the fluorescence above seemed to fade. Click! The lock gave in, and the door creaked open for the first time in 15 years. It was cold inside. Not just AC too high cold, but damp, forgotten underground kind of cold. The kind that stuck to your clothes and crawled up your spine. Jet didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just walked in like he had been here before. Mallory's flashlight swept across the room. Metal bed frame, rusted bolts, mattress missing. A small sink in the corner cracked and dry. Faded green tile floors covered in dust and dead bugs. A collapsed chair beneath a broken light fixture. And there at the far end, the mirror. It dominated the wall nearly floor to ceiling. Thick, industrial-grade glass. Cracked on one edge. There was no frame, just the glass fitted flush against the concrete like it had been welded in. Mallory walked closer. Her boots echoed. Jet stood perfectly still, not blinking. She wiped a layer of grime from the glass with her jacket sleeve. That's when she saw it. At the bottom of the mirror, beneath the grime, half hidden in old dust letters. Not scratched in, written. In what looked like her stomach turned dried blood. She wiped harder. The message became clear. "Don't trust anyone in this hospital." Mallory stared at it. The edges of the letters had crusted, flaked. This wasn't written yesterday or last month. This had been here for years. Jet whined softly and sat at her feet. His ears were flat, not in fear but in recognition. He knew this place. He had smelled this pain before. She stepped back and raised her flashlight to the mirror. Behind the glass was another room. Mallory pressed her palm against the cold glass. On the other side was a small observation booth about the size of a walk-in closet. A desk chair and a rack of what looked like VHS tapes lined one wall. There was a camera mounted on the ceiling pointing into the room she stood in now, into room 207. The glass wasn't just a mirror. It was a surveillance window. One way, somebody had been watching Kayla. And maybe others. She walked the perimeter of the room searching for access. A vent, a hatch, anything. Jet followed. Behind the mirror, just past a crack in the drywall, she spotted a thin seam in the wall. She tapped it. Hollow. A hidden door. No knob, just pressure-lock seams. She pushed. Nothing. Jet stepped forward and placed a paw against the wall. Still nothing. Mallory grabbed the crowbar from her belt and wedged it into the gap. The drywall cracked. Dust spilled out. She yanked harder. The door groaned open an inch, then another. Finally, it gave. She stepped into the observation room. The air smelled like rotted paper and mildew. No ventilation, no lights. Jet stayed just outside the door watching. The desk inside was covered in dust, old files, a coffee cup still stained with rings. The tape rack was mostly empty, but 3 tapes remained labeled in fading Sharpie. Kayla 0309. Kayla 0401. Kayla 0410. She slipped the first tape into the VCR that sat below the monitor on the wall. To her surprise, the old machine clicked and whirred to life. The screen lit up in static, and then an image. Kayla Monroe. She looked about 17. Dark hair, thin face, wearing hospital scrubs 2 sizes too big. She sat on the edge of the bed in room 207. The video had no sound. Kayla turned toward the mirror and pointed at it. Then she mouthed something 3 words. Mallory leaned in. I see you. Then the camera flickered. Kayla sat still for a long time. Then she got up and walked to the mirror. She placed her hand against it right where Mallory had minutes ago. Then she pointed behind her, to the wall, the same spot where the bloody message had been written. Mallory changed the tape. This time Kayla was pacing. She looked nervous, agitated. She pointed to her arm, then to the door, then to the mirror again. Suddenly the door opened behind her. A figure stepped in. Tall, male, white lab coat, but the camera was too low resolution to make out his face. Kayla backed up. She looked like she was shouting. The man stepped closer, raised a hand, maybe a needle. Then the footage cut out. Mallory swallowed hard. She looked at the 3rd tape. Her fingers hesitated. Jet gave a low growl. Yeah, she whispered. I know. She slid the last tape in. The screen buzzed. Kayla lay on the bed, motionless. Then her fingers twitched. She tried to sit up but slumped back down. The camera timestamp blinked erratically, then static. Then, Kayla staring directly into the mirror. Eyes wide, tears on her cheeks. She mouthed something. Over and over. The same word. Help! And then, the screen went black. Mallory yanked the tape from the VCR. She tucked all 3 into her jacket and turned to leave. Jet was already waiting by the door. But something stopped her. The desk drawer. She pulled it open. Inside a locket. Small, silver, heart-shaped. She opened it. Inside a photo of Kayla Monroe. And the words, "Come home soon." Mallory left the hospital that night with the tapes in her backpack, and Jet pressed close to her side. Outside, the wind had picked up. A storm was rolling in. She looked back at the hospital, its windows glowing under the gray sky. Inside, people were still walking halls, still treating patients, still pretending room 207 didn't exist. But it did. And it saw everything. The next morning, Mallory took the tapes to a local news contact. She trusted Mike Darnell, a producer at WZOH Channel 4, who had once blown the lid off a police corruption case in Cincinnati. She handed him the bag. "What's this?" he asked. "Proof," she said, "and a warning." "From who?" She stared at him. "From a girl who tried to tell the truth and never made it out." The tapes shook Mike Darnell to his core. The seasoned TV producer had seen war zone footage, political scandals, even police brutality cases. But there was something about Kayla Monroe's silent pleas through the glass about the shadowy figure in the lab coat that left him speechless. He promised Mallory he'd dig into it carefully. No big expose, not yet. We pushed too fast, Mike said, and this story vanishes along with everyone involved. Let me vet it. Quietly. We'll confirm the doctor's identity, trace the funding, build this like a case file. Mallory agreed, but every part of her itched to act. Because she had a name now. Dr. Garrett Holland, the man in the lab coat, the man who drugged Kayla Monroe, and according to official hospital records, he didn't exist anymore. That afternoon, she took Jet for a drive. Out of town, off-grid, a park near the edge of the woods where cell reception dropped and people mostly kept to themselves. She needed to breathe, to think. Jet ran off-leash through the trees, nose to the wind, chasing squirrels and shadows. For a moment, he looked like a normal dog again. Not a soldier, not a sentinel. Mallory sat on a picnic bench, the locket still in her pocket. She opened it again. Kayla's tiny face smiled back, frozen in time, probably from a school photo. Mallory whispered, "I don't know who failed you, but I swear to God it won't be me." Jet barked once, not playfully. A warning! Back at the station, she ran every search she could. Dr. Garrett Holland. Nothing in the current hospital database. Nothing on state licensing boards. Nothing in the National Physician Registry. She went analog old HR rosters from pre-2010, hidden in dusty PDF archives and half-scanned newsletters from St. Vincent's employee files. Finally, in a 2008 holiday bulletin, she found it. Welcome to our newest behavioral health team member, Dr. Garrett Holland, PhD, Columbia alum, published author in adolescent response modeling. Excited to have him join our trauma care team. Bingo. She looked up his thesis. Found it buried in a psychology journal, Compliance Behavior in Non-Voluntary Environments. That wasn't therapy. That was control. Mallory called Mike. Found him, she said. He was real. Columbia doctorate. Peer-reviewed paper in 2007, vanished after 2009. You check private funding. She blinked. What? Some doctors get their research funded off books. Military, pharma, experimental labs. Sometimes they don't show up on hospital payroll, especially if the hospital doesn't want them there officially. She stared at the mirror reflection of herself in the squad car window. What kind of doctor works somewhere he's not supposed to exist? Mike said the kind who's doing something the public isn't supposed to see. She hung up and turned to Jet in the back seat. We're not done, Jet barked once, as if to say not even close. That night, Mallory returned to the hospital under the pretense of a routine security walk. No one asked questions. She kept her badge visible, acted like nothing was wrong. Inside, things felt different. The air was tense. Nurses whispered a little too quietly. A doctor passed her without saying hello. The front desk clerk looked up, made eye contact, and quickly looked away. Word had spread. People knew she was digging, and someone wanted her to stop. Jet led her to the lower level. Not the psych wing, but the old file storage basement. It had been partially cleared during renovations, but still held rows of filing cabinets behind a chain-link gate. She used her security override to enter. There were thousands of patient files, many redacted, some misplaced, none digitized. She searched under M for Monroe. Nothing. She checked H for Holland. Nothing. Then Jet began sniffing hard. He pawed at the back of the cabinet row labeled Staff Transfers 2008-2010. Mallory opened the drawer. Inside an unmarked brown folder. No label, just a thick paperclip holding a stack of typewritten forms. She flipped through them. Photos. Notes. Kayla Monroe's intake report. Not filed under patients. Filed under unclassified behavioral study candidates. Her blood ran cold. The next page was a scan of a consent form, but the signature line was blank. Beneath it, patient classified as legally incapable of informed consent due to psychiatric impairment. Waiver granted by Dr. G. Holland. Mallory felt sick. Kayla hadn't agreed to anything. She was committed under the guise of care, then passed off into some kind of experimental behavior program. There were charts tracking her response windows, resistance phases, and mirror feedback loops. It was clinical, inhuman, like she was a rat in a lab, not a scared teenage girl. And next to each data entry, no medical notes, only timestamps. Jet growled, deep, chest level. Mallory turned. Someone was coming. She shoved the folder inside her jacket, flipped off the light, and ducked behind a row of boxes. Footsteps echoed down the stairs. Two people, voices low. She's a cop. We can't spook her. She's already past spooked. If she goes public, this whole thing falls apart. Then maybe she disappears too. Mallory held her breath. Jet didn't move. The voices faded. The footsteps retreated. She stayed hidden 5 more minutes, heart pounding, before slipping out the emergency exit and back into the night. Back at her apartment, she locked every door. Jet slept with one ear up. She didn't sleep at all. Instead, she read every page of that file twice. She now had confirmation that Kayla had been used in unauthorized human experimentation, that her signature was forged, that Dr. Garrett Holland had orchestrated it, and that St. Vincent's had buried it for over a decade. She had enough for a full-blown investigation. But there was still one thing missing. Proof that Holland was still alive. Mallory called Mike again. He picked up on the second ring. I need to find someone, she said. Off-grid, probably using a different name. Mike hesitated. I've got a guy. Backgrounds, deep searches, shadow databases. He'll need something to go on. She opened the folder again. Inside was a blurry ID badge photo of Dr. Holland from 2009. I'll send this, she said. Let me know what he finds. The next night, she was back at the hospital against every sane instinct she had. Jet seemed to know this wasn't a patrol. This was a confrontation. She returned to room 207 one last time. Not for evidence, for memory. She walked inside, turned off her flashlight, and stood in the darkness. She closed her eyes and imagined Kayla sitting there, 17, scared, determined. She whispered, You weren't crazy. You were right. Jet stood at the mirror. Then suddenly he barked. Once. Loud. Alert. Mallory's eyes snapped open. In the mirror, just for a moment. A reflection. Not hers. Not Jet's. A man. Wearing a white coat. She spun around. The door was open. But no one was there. Only the sound of footsteps fading fast. She and Jet ran. Down the hall. Through the corridor. Around the corner. Gone. The next morning, Mike called. You're not gonna like this, he said. Try me. Holland changed his name in 2010. Quiet legal transfer sealed records. He's practicing again. Private facility. Out in Maine. Where? Facilities called Arcadia Hills Wellness Center. High-end, discreet. They specialize in trauma recovery and alternative therapy. Mallory gripped her phone so hard her knuckles turned white. Send me everything. I'm going. You sure? She looked down at Jet, who was staring out the window like he could already smell the ocean breeze. No, she said. But neither was Kayla. And she walked through that door anyway. The drive from Ohio to coastal Maine took nearly 13 hours. Mallory didn't sleep. Jet, curled in the back seat, rested with one eye open the entire time. She had memorized every detail of the folder, every timestamp on Kayla's tapes, every frame of the man who had once worn a white lab coat inside room 207, and now that man, Dr. Garrett Holland, was going by the name Gregory Holt, running a luxury trauma facility called Arcadia Hills Wellness Center. On paper, it was a retreat, a place where wealthy clients healed in peace and silence. But Mallory didn't believe in peace that came with NDAs and barbed fences. And Jet didn't believe in silence, not when someone like Holland was still out there. Arcadia Hills sat on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. Wind swept in from the sea, sharp and salty. The grounds were pristine, too pristine. Perfect hedges, perfect stone paths, security cameras tucked into tree branches like eyes that never blinked. Mallory checked in under a false name. A contact from Mike's team had secured a cover, Claire Jensen, a first responder battling post-traumatic stress. The center welcomed her with open arms and a rehearsed smile. Jet came as a registered service dog. Nobody questioned it. The intake coordinator handed her a schedule. Group therapy, guided journaling, silent meditation, and a private session with Dr. Gregory Holt. scheduled for 10 a.m. the next day. That night in the guest cabin assigned to her, Mallory reviewed the files one last time. She placed Kayla's locket on the nightstand. Jet paced the room, restless. She whispered, "He's here, isn't he?" Jet growled, low, deep, then walked to the front door and sat there, waiting. The next morning, Mallory walked into a therapy room that looked more like a luxury office than a place of healing. Leather chairs, tall windows, warm tones. And him, same jawline, same eyes, a little grayer, a little heavier. But definitely Dr. Garrett Holland. He smiled warmly as if he hadn't drugged a teenage girl and watched her scream silently through 2 inches of bulletproof glass. "Claire Wright, Officer Jensen," he asked, gesturing to a chair. "Please make yourself comfortable. We're all friends here." Jet didn't move. He stood in the doorway, eyes locked. "Tail still. Can I ask what brought you here?" Holland asked gently. Mallory studied him. "You ever hear of a girl named Kayla Monroe?" That smile faltered. Only slightly, but Jet caught it. He stepped forward, low growl rising in his throat. Holland looked down. "Your dog doesn't seem comfortable." Mallory leaned forward. "He remembers smells, you know, fear, blood, chemicals. He was there when we found her file, and the tapes." She saw the flicker in his eyes. There it was. Recognition. "You're not Claire," he said. Mallory pulled out her badge, slowly placing it on the table. "No," she said. "I'm Officer Lauren Mallory, and you're not Dr. Holt." The room turned ice cold. Holland stood, slowly. "I think this session's over." Jet lunged forward not to bite, but to block, to guard. Mallory stood calm. "I'm not here to arrest you, not yet. I just want one thing, the truth." "About what?" She pulled the locket from her pocket and placed it beside the badge. "About her." Holland stared at the photo. Then he laughed. Just once. A broken sound. "You think I killed her?" Mallory didn't answer. Holland stepped back and looked out the window. She was too aware. She understood the mirror. Understood me. That wasn't supposed to happen. They told me she was sedated. "So where is she?" Mallory asked. He didn't answer. Jet barked. Loud. Demanding. Holland flinched. That afternoon, Mallory filed a report with a federal liaison using the tapes, the false patient files, the consent forms. With Mike's help, the documents were sent to the DOJ, bypassing local law enforcement entirely. Within 48 hours, the facility was locked down. Staff were questioned. Computers were seized. Holland tried to flee. Jet tracked him to a fishing shack 5 miles up the coast. The man had changed his name once. He wouldn't get the chance again. Mallory walked him out in cuffs. Jet led the way. But one question still haunted her. Where was Kayla Monroe? No body had ever been found. No confirmation of death. Only flickering tape footage and a girl's desperate whisper to the glass. Then, 2 weeks after the arrest, a letter arrived at Mallory's department. No return address. Inside a photo. A young woman, late 20s, smiling in a field, holding hands with 2 kids. On the back, "You helped me. You heard me. Thank you." Kay. Mallory sat down. Hard. Jet rested his head in her lap. And for the first time in months, she cried. 2 months later, St. Vincent's held a press conference. The hospital officially acknowledged the unauthorized experimental program that had been run by former staff in 2009. They vowed full cooperation with ongoing investigations and pledged to honor the memory of those affected. Room 207 was reopened, this time not for patients, but as a memorial. Inside the glass booth, a single quote now hung where the mirror once stood. "I see you, Kayla Monroe." Jet was awarded the National Canine Valor Medal at a ceremony in D.C. He didn't understand the speech or the standing ovation, but he wagged his tail when Mallory knelt beside him and whispered, "We did it. Today, room 207 is empty. But if you walk past it late at night, nurses swear they hear scratching at the door. Not scary. Not ghostly. Just a sound that says, 'I remember. Thank you so much for following this story all the way through. It's been a powerful journey, one of truth, courage, and the bond between a handler and her dog. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think justice was fully served? And what would you have done in Officer Mallory's place? Let us know in the comments." And if this story moved, you don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals, where true courage has 4 legs and never forgets.